I'd like to welcome you all to the June meeting of the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. Carla, if you would, please call roll.
Mark Arnold.
Here.
Whitney Hall. Marvin Kusick.
Here.
Eddie Mack.
Here.
David Mason.
Here.
Cole Ream.
Here.
Don Roberts.
Here.
James Simonek. Mike Stuber. And David Trojan.
Here.
That is a quorum.
We have a quorum, so I hereby call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is to consider the approval of the minutes of the regular Metropolitan Area Planning Commission meeting of May the 20th, 2019. If you've all had a chance to look at those, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the minutes. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. The next item is to discuss the proposed sidewalk ordinance revisions and make recommendation to the mayor and board of commissioners. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, commissioners. We've been actively studying this issue now for 3 months, and tonight is the first time that staff has actually put your thoughts into ordinance form, and I would like to present that to you to get any further comments that you may have. There are 8 items on the screen in front of you and in your packets. They basically drop into 3 different categories. We either made deletions in the current ordinance, we added new language to the current ordinance, or we added some exceptions. So that's really what it came down to. In developing the ordinance tonight, staff worked in harmony with Cole Ream, who basically led all of the meetings and study session for us. Thank you, Cole. We expanded that then to a subgroup of the Planning Commission, and that was David Mason, Whitney Hall, and Cole Ream, and who am I forgetting?
Jonathan Waddell.
Jonathan Waddell, who used to be with us and now has been replaced by David. So all of those different meetings and those different people made changes to the ordinance that now you're looking at. And the purpose of that was to bring the best product that I could to you this evening for your consideration. Number 1 is the recommendation is to make no changes to the residential. That seems to be working very well, received well by the community and the development. When we have new subdivisions, sidewalks are being designed and built right into it. We haven't had a variance request on residential, and I can't remember how long. I would have to research that for you. So we feel like that part of the ordinance does not need to be changed. 2, in the ordinance, it required in sidewalks within the development. The recommendation is to delete that language because the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, already requires that. I'll use an apartment project as an example. You'll have accessible parking that has to have an accessible route, which is a nice way to say sidewalk, to the unit they live in, a sidewalk to where they get their mail at the kiosk, a sidewalk that takes them to the trash dumpster. It's always there. It doesn't need, we don't need it in the sidewalk ordinance. It already occurs with other regulation. So the recommendation is to delete that. 3 is where most of the work is done. We actually define where commercial, industrial, and special use sidewalks should occur. Mainly there it's commercial. The reason you see industrial and special use, when I show you a map here in a few minutes, in those areas, there is some small amount of industrial and SU. So this is not zoning that triggers it. It's where the zoning is that triggers the sidewalk. 4, we talked about, this is one of the changes that came from the subgroup. In your study sessions, the current ordinance, if you do an addition, regardless of how big or small, you have to do a sidewalk. The proposal here is if the addition is under 2,500 square feet, you do not need to do a sidewalk. And your thought in your study sessions is that keep the cost of the sidewalk small in proportion to the cost of the project that's being built. Your study sessions, you said match the site plan requirements, which would have been 5,000 square feet. The subgroup felt like that was a bit large and they are bringing to you tonight a lower number of 25. You can do as you wish. Number 5, we've talked about not requiring sidewalks in a ditch. 6, there was some discussion about if you didn't do an addition that, and you made an investment in your building, you should do a sidewalk. There is no language in this. If you do a remodel, it does not trigger sidewalk. If you do maintenance, put a new roof on your building, that does not trigger a sidewalk. Or if there's total loss, some kind of natural disaster, you can build your building back and not do a sidewalk. So those are not there. Number 7 in the previous ordinance, this was a change that came to me from my city manager when I showed him what I'm about ready to show you. We had you could elect to do a fee in lieu of building the sidewalk. And when he looked at what we had studied and what's being proposed, he said, well, we really don't need that anymore. And I said, you're really right. I did not focus on that. I just accepted that as a fact. But so there was some really good insight. If the city commission embraces what you're proposing, then, and you're in this location, you're building anew, you're doing an addition over 2,500, you're going to build it. The sidewalk ordinance is going to require you to build a sidewalk. And if the bar ditch is there or the drainage ditch, then you would be exempt. So the thought is there will be no need for that. And then the last one is if you're not in the defined area, you don't have to do a sidewalk. So then in addition to your study session, you spend a lot of time talking about the city identifying other funding options, and I listed them there for you to help fund city sidewalk projects. Are there any questions on what I've gone over so far? Feel free to stop me at any time. Okay.
Excuse me, Chris, we had just a short discussion this morning. I want to be certain, and I expect the city diligently works in locating all available grant money. Those programs continue to evolve and change. And I'm not sure, David, you may have a better perspective on what the city looks for, but there are a multitude of programs beyond the Department of Transportation, state and federal programs that continue to evolve with community development funds. Some relate to educational facilities in particular. So an encouragement that we seek all those sources out, that those funds were paid in and derived by Oklahomans. We want to make sure we've explored all of them.
Thank you. My next slide, we're looking at our comprehensive plan. And this will make sense to you on my next slide because then we start talking about where we're going to do sidewalks. This comprehensive plan is just a few years old. It talks about making Enid more walkable, and more importantly, it also talks about where commercial should occur. And you see the red dots, some are small, those are neighborhood centers, and then you see some that are large, and there are community centers. And the community centers offer goods and services that outside Enid needs as well. Not only does Enid trade there, but our neighbor, our trade tributary is there. And I'll just take you to Garland and Garriott. There's 3 really good examples there. You have Atwoods, you have Walmart, and you have Lowe's. They trade to their trade area is the region, so that's the concept behind a community center. The smaller ones are more designed for the neighborhood around that center, offering commercial services to them. Next slide. And then we have the corridors, which is along Van Buren and Garriott. This slide now took the comp plan, and that's a map of the city of Enid and those locations and street intersections. The yellow lines are where we would have sidewalks along 412, okay, Garriott, along Willow, along Van Buren. Excuse me. And then you see that shape that outlines downtown. And then this is Randolph, Broadway, and Main. Any questions on that slide? So this is the slide that if you're in these areas and you're one of those 3 zoning districts, commercial, industrial, or special use, and you're doing a new development, the ordinance will require you to do a sidewalk. Very similar to if you're in the residential that's working, if you're doing new residential, you build a sidewalk. Also in these areas, if you're doing an addition greater than 2,500 square feet, you'll do a sidewalk. If you are doing infill, you're doing a sidewalk. So those are all defined in the ordinance. Any questions on that? Okay. Next one, we actually go into the ordinance, and everything in the ordinance that has an underline means it's new language. And if we have struck through it, means that that language is being proposed to be removed. So the first thing you see there is ditch. And I just gave you a definition of what that is. And that's important in a minute when we get to the exceptions. The next one in there is, well, what is a community center, neighborhood center? And I had those defined for you in the previous slide right here. Well, I'm sorry, one more. I went the wrong, we'll go one more back. Thanks, Carla. There they are.
There it is, okay.
And we'll just simply refer back to our comprehensive plan on what those are. But it becomes important in a minute. So the next thing is the residential. And you see I put the word residential there in a line underneath it. Our current ordinance had all the requirements lumped together, whether it was commercial or residential. This is just a structural change. And when my staff is dealing with the development community, it's just easier for them if they're residential to go to that part of the ordinance, and then they focus on that. Or if I'm working with a commercial developer, we go to that part. So you'll see a whole new commercial in a second. You see that I struck the line through 4 and 5. Those deal with commercial, and again, this is in the residential part, so I'm removing those. That's important. And then C is where we required sidewalks within the development, and this is being struck because ADA, as I explained at the beginning, takes care of that. The next slide is the new commercial. I purposely grade the street names, and all those is words of the map that I showed you. It just describes it, okay? What's important, that's important, but what I want you to see is C and number 5 at the bottom. This, if you're a commercial, industrial, special use, new development, addition, redevelopment, and infill developments abutting streets within the following areas, and we list them there: downtown, community center, and neighborhood center, or you abut one of the following streets, you have to build a sidewalk. That's how the picture takes the shape of words. I'm not the best at writing words. Once we're done through the city commission, this ordinance will be turned over to City Attorney Carol Lehman, and it'll probably look completely different, but at least it'll be legal, and I'm trying to capture the concepts for her. Number 5 at the bottom is real important to understand. It's community center, neighborhood center shall, I can't read that, include a sidewalk the width of the commercial, industrial, special use zoning, lot, development, whichever is less. And I've got a couple examples because a lot's being said there in that few amount of words. So my next slide gives you an example. This is a neighborhood center at the intersection of Randolph and Oakwood. I chose this one particularly because those of you who know Randy Ham, Stuart Pontiac, this is his future home, is where his dealership is going to be. I have actually seen his development plans. He owns all of this C3, okay? But he basically is developing this north part. So if he was developing the whole thing, the ordinance says the size is the zoning, so the sidewalk would be required here. Or the size of the development, in his case, it's here. So he would do a sidewalk like this. Then when he develops the south part, he would continue the sidewalk. So that is a good example of those two requirements and how they would be applied. Now, the next one is a lot. So here is the size of this zoning, but you see there's multiple lots here, okay? So ultimately, commercial, when it develops, new, infill, or additions, you'll have sidewalks along here. So, or the size of the lot. So if it's this guy developing, it'll be just the size of his lot. Does that make sense? Good. And then the same thing happens over here. If this is right now where we just had a new Casey's C-store went in, and then there's a bank right above it. If the bank were to be removed or torn down or repurposed, then they would build a sidewalk just on their lot. And then, of course, this is an existing shopping center. So the next slide is a community center. And this is one where the city of Enid is working on La Homa Courts. This SU really isn't here anymore. You have to understand my MESHAC runs, the city's already rezoned it, but it takes about 6 months for my tool to be upgraded. So it really is C3. So that is not SU. It was, but it's been changed. And this will all come back as a new development. So there'll be new sidewalks here. This is part of the zoning here, which is Sunset Plaza. And then this would be Emmanuel Baptist Church. Then you have all of this triangle area here that would have sidewalks as this develops. And then you have commercial there. So this, and at some point, you're now linear along Garriott. At some point, it stops being a concentrated center and it starts being linear. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to articulate and show how number 5 would actually be implemented. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Last section we're going to talk about, now we're back to what ordinance. I know pictures are better, but we talk about exceptions. We had if you had an addition on an unimproved road, you didn't have to build a sidewalk. Well, where we're talking about doing sidewalks in this ordinance, there are no unimproved roads, so it's gone. Number 1, additions that meet the site plan review. Okay, we missed something there. That is my mistake. That should say, I have it correct on my copy, but I didn't get it in your presentation. Is it correct in yours? In your packet, number 1 should say additions that do not exceed 2,500 square feet. Is that in yours?
That's
okay,
there.
good. I apologize. I missed this in my slide for you. So that's wrong on the screen, but it's right in your packet. Number 2, well, that's wrong too. The word borrow caused problems, no matter who I was talking to. And when you're writing ordinances, it wasn't a bad problem. It just always, well, what is that? Do you spell it with an O? Do you spell it with an A? People wanted to talk about something that really didn't change the subject matter of the ordinance, but it illustrates how words can cause confusion. And so I got away from that word and that definition, and in your packet, it should just simply say ditch. I apologize for that. Then number 3 is correct. If you're just doing building maintenance, remodels, or a total loss, you don't have to do a sidewalk. And then the last one is number 5, and that talks about we're deleting the site development fee in lieu of that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. And that's the end of the changes. The sidewalk specifications of how you build it is not being changed. I think I have one more slide, and we took where we're gonna have sidewalks and we superimposed it over our master trail. And so you can see, I hope that shows up, the blue dash line. When you complete the trail system along with the commercial sidewalks, you have a pretty good coverage of the entire city of sidewalks. That's what the purpose of that slide is for. It's not in the ordinance. I'm just showing you how the ordinance works with the master trail plan. those are all my comments. What would you like for me to change differently or
Just got a question on the ditch.
ditch?
The ditch, yes.
Yes.
I mean, where water would drain through, I mean, it seems to me that there need to be an elevation or a slope before you make it an exception, because, I mean, if it's,
Okay.
you've got a
Yeah, we ought to.
slope.
You're gonna turn this over
That's
to
a ditch,
Carol
there's
to
drainage that goes
draft
through there.
it in the context of a statutory.
What you're saying is if we've already done the engineering, there's a box or a culvert, and it's just flat, they should go on and do that, and I would concur with you on that, yeah.
Right, you know, we've seen some of them that are out at 45, and that is gonna be extensive amount of work, but you could say at a, small slope, drainage drains through it, it's a ditch.
Ditch is
therefore
in the
it's
eyes of the
exempt.
beholder.
We'll get that defined. Thank you. That's a good input. Anyone else? Whatever you vote on here, and I need you to vote on this tonight, as this is your body of work, it's your recommendation for the mayor and board of commissioners to consider, but you can change the whole thing. You can say you missed the mark, Chris, come back, do more. I'm okay with that. I've tried to capture your study sessions and brought you something that I just need to know if you support it.
Confident that the amendment that you just suggested can be made? And if that, I'd say we ought to ship it upstream. If you're confident, that it'll get fixed, amended.
I would make a recommendation for this with clarification, like Mark suggested, on the difference between a ditch that's not been improved and a ditch that has already had engineering and improvement. I'm hoping Raleigh and Carol Lehman can better articulate my thought and your thought, so.
Yeah, but you're exactly right. There are huge ditches that, if I stood in, I couldn't see the road, and there's others, the ditch wouldn't come up to my knee. So that's a very good point, and we'll try to find that right compromise, and we'll try to do that between now and tomorrow when I present it to the city commission.
I think you should clarify the definition, and then it'd be up to your engineer to
Right.
final say-so.
Yeah, because there could be a right-of-way that has a ditch, but outside the ditch, but still within the right-of-way, a flat area that could receive a sidewalk. So just because there's a ditch there doesn't mean, what the exception is, we're not asking you to build a sidewalk in the ditch. So you could have this much right-of-way and the ditch and still have 6, 8, 10 feet that you could parallel the ditch. In
I
other
think the purpose
cases,
of this is that the sidewalk doesn't go down in the bottom of a ditch somewhere that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It's used for, specifically for drainage. And however you need to word that, I think if we can find a flat area up there that can get a sidewalk in, we need to try to get.
It's in the right of way.
or the slope is gentle enough that a modest cut and fill,
Right.
and it doesn't change the flow of the drainage, then we should require a sidewalk. But basically, if I have to, me being a developer, have to do dramatic change to the storm drainage system, then it's increased my cost of sidewalk, and our goal is to keep that cost down proportionate, so.
And also, we can't do engineering ourselves in the city's right of way and in their drainage. We'd have to get the city involved.
Can you help me with that, Morale? Okay, good. I have confidence. I have an engineer. Thank you.
And I'll just say, Chris, before we make a motion on this, good job on this.
You're welcome.
We worked for 3 months trying to verbalize this in a way that would be a workable plan. And I love the way that you've done the community centers, the neighborhood centers, and the fact that we're looking for where we truly want those sidewalks instead of where we don't want them necessarily. And, but I do think it's gonna have to be moving forward, the purpose of this body and the council to stop giving out a waiver every single time someone comes along. I mean, if it's in this area.
I don't think you're gonna see any waivers. I think
Okay.
I think this body and certainly city staff and we've got a city council that is wanting to make the correct changes, maybe opposes some we've had in the past. I think we've addressed enough of this that if we get a variance, it's gonna have to be pretty special. And, I would be surprised if we see one in the next year. I just don't think we're gonna see hardly any variances based on our discussion and what we see here. It stops a lot of that.
There is a benefit to the ordinance that we haven't talked about. If you're a developer coming to town, you've probably heard over the last 8 years, oh, I gotta build a sidewalk out in the middle of nowhere. That's what Enid makes me do. And we certainly have done that. But if you aren't on these routes or at these centers, then those people that are doing something on 54th or 42nd, oh, it doesn't apply. And so it helps those people know right up front that we're not asking them to do a sidewalk in what you could classify as the rural part of Enid. Enid is unique. We have really two cities. We have a rural part and we have an urban part. This basically asks for sidewalks where you would expect them to be in the urban area. So thank you for letting me add that.
Absolutely. So I have a motion that we recommend this for approval with respect to what Mr. Arnold said about some clarification on, and like I said, you and your own can help us on that, so that's my motion.
Okay.
You have the second. Okay, Commissioners, I have a motion and a second to approve the sidewalk plan as we've got it written with the changes that we're wanting to have made. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Let it be shown it's unanimous.
I have a second PowerPoint, David. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready for zoning? Consider a rezoning for property described as Lot 14, Block 64, original town site of Enid, located at 824 East Owen K. Garriott Road, from R4 residential duplex or two-family dwelling district to C3 general commercial district. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The slide in front of you is an excerpt out of the comprehensive plan, and this dark blue box represents the site being rezoned. Very close to a neighborhood center, is within the corridor designation per the comp plan for mixed uses. The next slide is the aerial photo. The yellow box represents what's being rezoned. It currently is zoned R4, and as you can see, the rest of the block on both sides is C3. We have an individual that wants to build a pharmacy in this part of our town, and they need, this is a piece of that property, and they need that zoning to be C3 in order to build the pharmacy. The next slide, we always want to make sure when we do rezoning that we have the infrastructure in place to support it. In this case, we have the sanitary sewer in the alley. It's adequate size. We have a 14-inch water line in the front in Garriott Road. It's adequate size. We have road access on 9th Street as well as Garriott. The last slide is, nope, that was last slide, excuse me. It's recommended for approval, Mr. Chairman.
We approve it.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the zoning. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed? That's unanimous. And section 4 is lot splits. Consider a lot split for Hammer Williams Company, which is a tract in the southwest quarter of section 10, township 22 north, range 7 west of the Indian Meridian, located in the 5300 block of West Owen K. Garriott Road. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The new Jiffy Trip is being built just to the west of this site. If you remember several months ago, Jiffy Trip bought this entire tract, which used to be the old orchard, pecan orchard, and they created a lot split for their C-store, and then they had this balance here. They are now coming back and asking to split this to this shape. They obviously have somebody interested in purchasing the property, And when we do a lot split, it's a lot like a rezoning. We want to make sure that the road, water, and sewer is adequate for the split. And you can see on this slide that we've included it. My last slide is the actual survey. It's recommended for.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the lot split. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed? And that motion carries. The next item on the agenda is adjournment. Do I have a motion?
You do.
Second? Second. A motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed? We're adjourned.
Thank you for joining us for the Enid Metropolitan Area Planning Commission meeting. All meetings are broadcast on local cable channel 12 and in high definition channel 112. In addition, this meeting is live streamed on the web at enidtv.org. If you have any questions or comments regarding this broadcast, please visit the City of Enid website at enid.org.